Shalom from Zion. Welcome to Intercessors for Israel's 2018 video update of our prayer conference. While today is the fourth day of the prayer conference, it's the third video update because yesterday we were out in the field. But let me go back to Wednesday night. Wednesday night there was a gentleman, it was me, who preached a message on humanism. And I'm just going to tell you one thing about that. Remember, all the sermons are online, and you can either hear them or download them for free. Humanism entered into the human race right in the Garden of Eden, and you can identify humanism, which is the first as well as the last of the giants, simply by these two things. It's a denigrating, a putting down of God's word, as God said, and an exalting of man. You shall be as God. Anytime you see one or both of those, be very careful. It's humanism, and it's something that really come against God's plans and His glory. Then on Thursday, we took a trip. We went down to Tel Aviv, where we visited Independence Hall, and then we came back up to Jerusalem, where we saw Ammunition Hill. And Independence Hall is where David Ben-Gurion 70 years ago declared that Israel is the Jewish state in the land of Israel that will be known as the State of Israel. So they declared the Jewish state. And it's interesting to us that this is one of Netanyahu's foundational demands for the peace process to go forward, that the Palestinians recognize that this is the Jewish state. It's not something he just came up with out of his head or something he's using to kind of hold the Palestine. No, this is a serious foundational issue. It goes to the very roots of the modern day state of Israel. And so may Netanyahu continue to make those demands. We'll get to that in just a bit. What we did last night, as opposed to a message, is we had a time of praise. And Devin Mitchell, our brother, one of the directors on the board, led us in a time of praise in the beginning. And he mentioned to us that there are times when we, in this generation, take it for granted that God is fulfilling so much of His word before our eyes. For example, Isaiah 66:8, a nation was born in one day, 71 years ago at the UN. Jeremiah 31:17, where it says, there is hope for your future. Your children will return again to their borders. We're seeing that. Jeremiah 31 obviously has been coming to pass for the past 2,000 years. So that's the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament going forth. But now it's going forth here in Israel as well. Ezekiel 36:34 says that God says, I will make the desolate land that was wasted cultivated, like the Garden of Eden. And we saw pictures of when they started Tel Aviv, and it was a sand dune. It was wasted. There was nothing there. It's now cultivated. It's a beautiful city. And so we have all of these things coming to pass before our eyes, and unless we take a step back and know our Bible, sometimes God fulfills His word, and it just runs right past us. So during a time of praise and thanksgiving, people were thanking God for things like the prophecy in Zechariah 8, where it says, old men and women, young children will be playing in the streets. And if you think this is marvelous in your eyes, O house of Israel, because at that time Jerusalem was desolate, should it be marvelous in my eyes, says the Lord. We see that happening today. We thanked God for today Jerusalem, which is His city, the city of the great King, is united. That God is watching over His word to perform it, from Jeremiah 1:12. And from Psalm 147, verse 2, the Lord is building Jerusalem. He's gathering together the outcasts of Israel. Now, our brother Heinz-Jürgen Husen, who is the director of Intercessors for Israel, Germany, said what impressed him most down in Independence Hall was when the guide said that after the war, everybody went home, except the Jews didn't have a home to go home to. And Israel is now the home of the Jews. And so what that burdened him with was a desire for us to really pray for Aliyah. So that's what we did. When Aliyah shot through the roof in 1948, when people came out of the concentration camps, and during the next number of years when they were kicked out of the Arab countries, And then after 67, Aliyah had another increase. And obviously when the Iron Curtain fell, we had close to 200,000 Russians come home in a very short period of time. It's slowed down now. 27,000 Jews last year is still a good number, but compared to the fact that the majority of Jews live outside of this land, there is still a lot of work to do. So we prayed for the Jews to come home, for them to realize it's important for them to come home yesterday, as soon as possible. And some of the things we prayed for, one person prayed, open ears and hearts of the Jews in exile and give them the grace to have a desire to make Aliyah. And then we also prayed for doors here to be open for the Jews to return home. And we also asked that God would raise up some Jewish leaders like Herzl, who would actually lead the people home, as opposed to Jewish leaders who said, well, we'll be here to turn out the lights when the last Jew leaves. No, you're shepherds. It's time to lead the people home. Obviously, we asked also that the Messianic Jews who live in exile would be confronted with their unwillingness to even consider Aliyah. There are many who are not even willing to consider it. Thank God for those of you who are willing to consider it. May the Lord speak to you. And Ezekiel 36, we also prayed that God said, Father, you're going to do this for your holy name's sake. Therefore, we're pressing on with you for your holy name's sake, for your glory's sake, for your kingdom come and your will be done. Bring your people home from the nations. And then the Lord laid it on our heart to pray for the nations to pray for Aliyah, because God's often holding back doing the fullness of his will until people ask him, and it's the nations. And we actually ended up with people representing at least 26 nations in our small group, 120, 130, who prayed specifically for the churches in their nations to wake up, including Iran, Russia, the Caribbean, South Africa, Ireland, Finland, just look at Malaysia. That's a good one. May the church in Malaysia wake up. And others. It was an awesome time of prayer last night, and we're believing that the Lord will answer us sooner rather than later, because we believe the time is short. This morning, our brother Jeremy continued his teaching on the book of Nehemiah, and he talked about how anytime God does a work, or anytime people are doing a work for God, we should expect opposition. And he led us through Nehemiah 6, where we looked at distraction, lies, and enemies collaborating against us. And even when God had the wall finished in 52 days, there was still more trouble. And that was interesting because it led right into our next topic of prayer this morning, which was internal security. And we thanked God that he had used the IDF to stop hundreds of attempted terror attacks last year. And that was an answer to prayer. But we concentrated initially on the south because the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is severe. And we were wondering whether Hamas was manipulating this so that all the people in Gaza would rush the border with Israel, and Israel would either have to do something to stop these women and children, and of course, we would be the bad guys. Although it's Hamas who's stealing the money, stealing the food, using it to build tunnels. Hamas is the one ultimately responsible. So we did pray for the people in Gaza that God would supply their needs, that they would realize that Hamas are wicked overlords, and some of the things we prayed for concerning the IDF to know how to deal with this southern issue was from Psalm 144:1. God is the one who teaches my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And we asked the Lord to raise up some Rahabs to hide all of our spies and our collaborators. Amos 1, 6, and 7 was interesting. It talked about Gaza being a demonic stronghold that we asked to bring down. There was also from Psalm 124, a couple of people prayed out of this. Blessed be the Lord who has not given us his prey to their teeth. Our soul is escaped as a bird out of the snare of the fowler. The snare is broken. We are escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, creator of heaven and earth. And at times, with the situations in Israel, it's God who has to break us out of a snare that the enemy has put us into. Then we broke up into small groups, and we prayed for the gospel to go forth and permeate Gaza. Remember, the very first time the gospel left the land of Israel to go to another nation was through the Gaza Strip when John preached the gospel to the Ethiopian eunuch who was heading back down to Ethiopia. So we asked that, wouldn't it be awesome if a move of God happened in Gaza and these people who hate us ended up becoming our brothers and sisters and provoking this nation to jealousy? God can do things like that. Then we talked, the next session, we mentioned what happened yesterday in Davos, where President Trump threw down the gauntlet to the Palestinians, and he said, you either come back to the negotiating table and respect us, or we're pulling all of our money out from supporting you. There's no reason we're going to waste any money with you anymore. And of course, the Palestinian response was, you can go to... And so here we have two very strong forces fighting each other. And Israel, of course, is the one who's in the middle of this. And we are actually very glad that Trump has finally changed the story concerning this peace process, which always seems to come back from the dead and beckons to Israel that you will just have peace if you divide God's land. It's a lie. We don't want to see it happen. And then Netanyahu said in an interview after this that he is willing to offer the Palestinians autonomy, but not a full state, because Israel needs to keep security control. So something has happened that has totally changed the foundation of this peace process. And yet the rest of the world, especially the blind lovers of money European Union, insists that the only answer is two states with Jerusalem divided. Doesn't matter what the Bible says, doesn't matter what Trump says or Israel says, this is what we want. And so Abbas went crying to them. Anyway, we prayed for Trump to be held to his words. We prayed for Netanyahu and the government to know how to respond to this, because if this peace process falls apart, there will be most likely an increase of violence in the streets of Israel and maybe against Jews worldwide. So we started out by blessing Trump for his stand, and also Mike Pence, the vice president, as well. We thanked God for using Trump to shake everything that can be shaken at this point. And we recognize it's ultimate God who raises up kings into positions and brings them down. And while Trump may be brash, and while you may not like his attitude, please understand that if God can use Balaam's ride, he can sure use Donald Trump for his glory. And we also asked for Bibi, for Netanyahu, not to be so enamored with his new best friend in the White House that he just is willing to give away anything and everything because of how wounded he was under the last 8 years of Obama. That was very painful for him. We prayed some more about the possibility of violence, and that Israel, the IDF and the security would be ready for it, as well as Israel's citizens would be ready for it. And we then praised God for what he's doing in these last days, and we ended with just a time of praying for the Kurds to have their state as well. Well, we hope you join us again tomorrow. Lord bless you, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem. Why did you do